With the end of 2019, we also end the most important decade in the history of photography. And as we look back, there can only be one camera of the decade. Our camera of the year was a Sony A7R IV with its 60 megapixels and amazing autofocus. But will it be the camera of the decade? Find out in just a minute. This picture of this podcast is brought to you by Squarespace. If you need a website, domain, some kind of online presence, Squarespace is the place to go. They make it easy enough so that anybody can do it, even me, and make it look fantastic on mobile devices, computers, whatever your potential clients might be using. It's the best way to really impress them with your work. If you're interested in checking out Squarespace, go to squarespace.com/Tony, get a 14-day free trial, and if you love it, only then do you have to give them your credit card number. You can use the coupon code TONY to get 10% off. Thanks, Squarespace. The A7R IV, it is amazing, and the readers of DP Review picked it as their camera of the decade, but I'm not giving it that. It's not historically noteworthy. It's fantastic, but it's just incrementally better than the cameras that came before it. And we can't pick the camera of the decade just based on megapixels or image quality, or we would just be giving it to the most recent, most expensive camera. Sorry, Sony. A more historically significant camera is this NX7 that launched the E-mount, the mount that would take over the camera industry and become the #1 best-selling mount, displacing companies like Canon and Nikon, who'd owned the industry for like 60, 70 years. Yeah, this NX E-mount camera changed everything, but it's still not the camera of the decade. This Sony A9 was far more important. It made us realize that mirrorless wasn't just for bridge cameras, but mirrorless could actually be better than DSLRs. It could focus faster. They could make mirrorless cameras with no viewfinder blackout that worked silently. And yeah, Sony took that same autofocus system and put it in a few cameras after, like the A7R IV that I just showed, but none will be as historically significant as the original Sony A9. But still, this is not the camera of the decade. The cameras that truly defined the teens were smartphones, and smartphones were developed in the aughts. But in the teens, we saw one big major advancement: computational photography. Smartphones like this Google Pixel or the Apple iPhone X specifically allowed us to do things with smartphones that we could only previously do with real cameras, things like blurring the background. And now with my iPhone 11 Pro Max costing like $1,400, I can take pictures of the stars completely handheld. It is pretty mind-blowing, and it is changing the camera industry forever. The camera of the decade is not a smartphone, though. I'm going to tell you the camera of the decade in just 1 minute after a word from our sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace makes it incredibly easy to set up gorgeous websites that will impress people with your photography, your business, or whatever else you want to create an online presence for. Squarespace does what your social media can't do, which is to show off your best work in a consistent and beautifully defined user interface. Once you create a Squarespace website, it really takes just a few clicks and a few seconds to update it, and that will keep it fresh and lively and a place for your customers and fans to go on a regular basis. If you want to check out Squarespace, head to squarespace.com/Tony. Get a 14-day free trial. If you love it, use the coupon code TONY and I'll give you 10% off. Maybe this beast should be the camera of the decade, the Nikon D850. It is the greatest DSLR that's ever been made. It handles just fantastically, better than any camera I've ever held. It takes advantage of the full suite of Nikon f-mount lenses going back to the 1950s. Seriously, it has lighted buttons and 45 megapixels and just is the pro's dream because it delivers every time. But it also historically marks the end of an era because it just might be the last great DSLR before we all move to mirrorless cameras, and thus maybe it deserves this award in memoriam. The Nikon D850 deserves recognition, but it's not the camera of the decade. You probably don't remember the camera of the decade, and that's kind of why it's so important. You see, the photography industry will forever remember the teens as being the rise of the digital camera. Camera sales peaked in 2012, 2013, and so many companies thought they could make billions and billions of dollars by selling eager people digital cameras, and they were right for a few years. But then the greatest digital camera came along and moved them out of the way. the smartphone. Sure, the smartphones don't have the megapixels or the dynamic range, but everybody has one anyway. And they're actually pretty good cameras. Good enough that most people don't need to buy a real camera. And in fact, when people do buy a real camera, they kind of find them to be a pain because they don't have the flexible user interfaces. They don't allow you to send pictures directly to Instagram or even directly to your phone, really. Today, new camera buyers spend $500, $1,000, $2,000 on a camera, and they want something better than their smartphone. But what they're getting is maybe better pictures, but worse overall usability. And what I find is a lot of people just decide to leave their cameras at home, but that wouldn't be the case if the camera of the decade had succeeded. This is the Samsung Galaxy NX, a camera you've probably never seen before. The entire rear of the camera is a massive, beautiful touchscreen display that comes alive in a way that no other camera does. Sure, when you first turn it on, it looks like an incredibly thin camera with a beautiful display at the rear, but it also has this amazing touch user interface, and just one button press away is an entire Android operating system. Yes, it can do anything your smartphone can do. It can run Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. You could do a live stream with nice background blur from this. You could make TikToks that actually looked beautiful and didn't look like everybody else's TikTok. Pop open the battery compartment and you'll see something pretty amazing. It's a micro SD card slot. Okay, that's not that amazing, but you don't even need it because it has internal memory. That's right, when you take pictures, it'll write to the SD card or to the internal memory. And either way, it can do something also amazing. It can upload those pictures directly to the cloud storage provider of your choice. Dropbox, Google Drive, whatever. It'll instantly upload a copy of your pictures there. And if you listened to our podcast recently about a camera getting stolen, imagine the photographer's relief if they knew that their camera had been continuously uploading everything to the cloud so that at least they wouldn't lose their pictures. But in this little battery compartment, there's something that's even more remarkable, and that's a SIM card. A SIM card allows it to connect to the wireless internet, the cellular internet. And in 2013, that seemed ridiculous because cell plans were pretty expensive and you couldn't simply add a device to your plan. But nowadays, my phone, my watch, my car, they all have a cellular plan, and it only costs me about $10 a month to add on each individual device, and it's totally worth it. And I have an unlimited data plan. In 2013, maybe that SIM card didn't make much sense, but in 2020, it makes total sense. Whenever I talk about wanting those features in a new camera, there's always a bunch of naysayers in the comments who say it just can't be done, it would kill the battery, it would be too complicated. This is living proof that not only could this be done, it was done 7 years ago. We just forgot about it. This is something people are willing to pay for, but not in 2013 when this was released. You see, in 2013, TikTok wasn't a thing, Snapchat wasn't a thing, Instagram was barely a thing. Most people who were into photography were totally comfortable with this process of taking out your SD cards and loading them onto a computer and then doing their processing in Lightroom and then uploading them that way, and using a camera with a built-in smartphone seemed really dumb. But times have changed since 2013. This camera at $1,600 seemed a little too complicated and didn't offer any clear benefits, but it was just ahead of its time. So if Samsung's so smart to make a camera before people needed it, why aren't they still making cameras? Maybe it's because they were so smart. Maybe they realized that the camera industry was going downhill and they were definitely going to lose money. You see, Samsung's a tech company. They're used to looking several years forward, and they launched their NX mount in 2010, right at the beginning of the decade, the perfect time to capitalize on that growing camera industry. But Samsung also makes smartphones, and they were intensely aware of what they were able to do with their smartphone cameras, and they also realized the importance of convenience. If this camera had been successful, the copycat camera industry, Canon, Nikon, Sony, they definitely would have made their version of it. But Samsung never made a version 2 of the Galaxy NX camera. If they'd stuck around just a little bit longer, maybe everything would have been different. Maybe Canon, Nikon, Sony would still be growing. Maybe all those TikToks and Instagram videos would look so much better. And instead, we have a generation who now has such a huge leap to make before they can understand modern cameras that they'll probably just never bother, and we'll just have to wait for smartphones to get better and better. That's why the Galaxy NX is the camera of the decade. By ignoring it and overlooking its potential, we locked in the fate of a dying camera industry struggling to make sales to an increasingly small number of camera enthusiasts. This is something we should all take a minute to reflect on, because there will be another Galaxy NX of the 20s, and what's that going to be? What is going to be the device that comes ahead of its time and you don't appreciate its potential? This Picture This podcast was brought to you by Squarespace. If you need a new website, make your next move with Squarespace. It will be super easy to set up. I myself have like 4 or 5 of them now. One of them is freesdp.com, where you can go and win yourself a drone. But better yet, here's a guaranteed win. Go to squarespace.com/Tony. Set up your website for free. Just sort through all of your pictures. Make yourself a portfolio. It's a good exercise and it won't cost you a penny. And then if you absolutely love it, use the coupon code TONY and you'll get 10% off. Thanks, Squarespace. In the comments down below, I'd like to hear what you think is the most historically significant camera to come out of the teens, and what do you think of the Galaxy NX? If there were a new interchangeable lens camera that had all the smartness of your smartphone, but could take real pictures with real lenses, would you be into that? Thanks for hanging out to the end of the video. I'd just like to say hi to all the pet ants out there who are writing a comment telling me that 2020 does not mark the end of the decade, that the end of the decade is technically December 31st, 2020. Shut up. Nobody cares that 791, the person who invented the calendar, started on year 1. We as humans acknowledge the end of decades because there is a change in a more significant digit. Rolling from 19 to 20 is a big deal. Rolling from 20 to 21, it's not a big deal. It's just human nature, even if it's not historically accurate. It was the VH1 hits of the 90s, not the VH1 hits of 1991 to 2001. Thank you and Happy New Year.